Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the cat is out of the bag. Waikato DHB confirms files sent to the media by alleged hackers are the real deal. Stolen patient information. The Health Minister reckons all other DHBs have locked their virtual doors and windows, but are they really sealed up tight? It's the countdown to lockdown in Victoria as a highly infectious strain of COVID spreads at an alarming rate. The battle to ban any more booze stores is costing Auckland ratepayers big bucks. A rich lister is jailed for indecently assaulting 3 men and trying to cover it up, but we still can't name him. And Wellington City Council changes up a gear, voting to fast-track cycleways.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Quarantine-free travel with Victoria will be paused for a further 7 days. The state has been plunged into a week-long lockdown to contain the COVID-19 outbreak in Melbourne. The cluster has grown to more than 30 cases and thousands of primary and secondary contacts have been identified. The government paused quarantine-free travel with the state on Tuesday and has today extended that measure by 7 days to next Friday. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says anyone who has travelled to New Zealand from Melbourne since May the 20th must isolate and be tested. The Waikato DHB will be contacting individuals whose sensitive data was hacked and then sent to media organisations. Scores of documents containing names, phone numbers and addresses of patients and staff were sent to various outlets, including RNZ, on Monday night. Waikato DHB Chief Executive Kevin Snee says they're now examining the files and will offer support to those affected.
We'll need to tailor support for individuals so we can provide support in terms of counselling if need be or guidance about what can be done to protect themselves. But I think we'll take each case on its own merit.
Waikato DHB Chief Executive Kevin Snee. The affected individuals will be contacted in the next day or so. The police have asked media outlets to delete any sensitive personal information emailed by the cyber attackers. The police have opened a criminal investigation and have asked media to delete any downloaded files. RNZ is considering the request. The family of a woman who died of an asbestos-related cancer and was wrongly declined ACC help says they're relieved and hope the ruling will help others. Deanna Trevathan died of mesothelioma caused by hugging her father as a child and was declined ACC cover in the years leading up to her death. Now, 5 years after her death and after a lengthy legal battle, the Court of Appeal has judged that she should have received assistance. Her sister-in-law, Angela Calver, says she's has a mixed bag of emotions.
Very happy, obviously, that the Court of Appeal have found in this manner and are forcing ACC to do their job. Sad, of course, that Dee's not here, but also relieved that this will do its job and help others.
ACC had said she was not exposed to asbestos while at work, therefore it wouldn't cover her. Invercargill's residents say it's time for Sir Tim Shadbolt to step down as mayor. His deputy, Nobby Clark, is quitting politics at next year's local body elections, in part due to the strain of fulfilling the role. Mr Clark is Invercargill's third deputy mayor in as many years. He would not tell RNZ if he still had confidence in Sir Tim's ability to perform the role of mayor, but Invercargill's residents overwhelmingly told RNZ they do not.
He's not up to it. He's slightly older than I am, and I know when to retire.
I'd like to see, a new mayor in place.
He's past his use-by date, I believe, and he should go step aside.
Even those who believe the criticism of Sir Tim needs to stop say they would not vote for him if an election was held tomorrow. 1 person has died and 3 are injured after a car crash near Kaiwaka on State Highway 1. A 12-kilometre stretch of highway between Kaiwaka Mangawhai Road and Mangawhai Road Te Hana is closed. Katie Todd reports.
The crash between a truck and a car happened near Settlement Road in Kaiwaka. It was reported to emergency services shortly after 1:30 this afternoon. The police confirmed 1 person died at the scene. 1 person has been airlifted to Whangarei Hospital with moderate injuries, and another person with serious injuries has been transported by road. St John says a third person with moderate injuries was treated at the scene. Motorists can detour via Mangawhai, but they're warned the road closure could be in place for some time. The serious crash unit is investigating. Ko Katie Todd, tēnei.
It's 4 minutes past 5. There's been a thawing in the relationship between New Zealand Rugby and the Rugby Players Association, with today's meeting in Wellington to discuss an alternative to the proposed $387 million Silver Lake deal. The two groups have been at loggerheads over the proposal, which would see the US private equity firm buy a 12.5% stake in a company that would control NZR's commercial rights. The Players Association and investment company Forsyth Barr is proposing a share float it says could raise $190 million. Players Association head Rob Nichol says the meeting gave them the chance to explain their proposal in greater detail.
Just a useful meeting. I think this week presented that opportunity to go into the more technical aspects sitting in behind the New Zealand Inc. proposal. And from a Players Association perspective, we found it useful, and hopefully New Zealand Rugby and their advisors were of the same point of view.
Rob Nichol says NZR has now gone away to further discuss the Forsyth Barr proposal. Villarreal have won their first European football title. The Spanish club have beaten Manchester United 11-10 on penalties in the final of the second-tier Europa League in Poland, after the scores were locked at 1-1 after 90 minutes and extra time. Rising New Zealand golfer Amelia Garvey has turned professional in time for the US Women's Open to be held in San Francisco next week. Garvey has just finished her college career at the University of Southern California. It'll be her second major tournament, having also played the US Open last year as an amateur. And just to hand, the Highlanders Super Rugby Trans-Tasman match against the Melbourne Rebels in Queenstown on Sunday has been moved to Sydney due to the extension of a travel pause between Victoria and New Zealand. That's the news.
Was the DHB IT system up to it?
The health IT systems are a dog's breakfast. This comes on the back of years of underinvestment by a previous government.
Patients left waiting for treatment.
Colleagues have described it as walking through fog. This level of failure is enormous. I think it's extraordinarily disruptive and stressful for the patients.
And hacked data at large.
I'm hoping that the DHB is monitoring dump sites on the dark web and is prepared to offer assistance and support to people.
Dialed in. Morning report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. Northern and western areas from Northland to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine tonight, a period of rain tomorrow, followed by a few showers and increasing fine spells in the afternoon or evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairatapa, showers north of Napier, clearing tonight. Mainly fine tomorrow, but a few afternoon or evening showers. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine tonight, rain or showers at times tomorrow. Nelson and Buller, a few showers developing this evening. A period of rain tomorrow, then easing in the afternoon. Westland and Fiordland, drizzle turns to rain in Fiordland this evening and Westland overnight, then easing to showers tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered rain developing in Southland today, elsewhere overnight. Snow to 800 metres tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. New Zealand has extended its pause on quarantine-free travel with Victoria for another 7 days. The Government of Victoria today put the state in lockdown for a week to contain the COVID-19 outbreak in Melbourne. Victorians aren't allowed to have any visitors to their home other than an intimate partner. There will be no public gatherings, while restaurants, pubs and cafes can provide takeaway. Thousands of people who have travelled to New Zealand from Melbourne since 11th of May were yesterday told to keep a close eye out for symptoms. Anyone who's been in Greater Melbourne and has travelled on to New Zealand in the last week is being asked to isolate and get tested. COVID-19 Minister Chris Hipkins made this announcement a short time ago.
In addition to that, we're putting in place some further requirements using the Health Act, which the Director General will run through the detail of shortly. One of the most obvious ones, which is already in place, is that anybody who has been in one of the locations of interest cannot travel to New Zealand, even if they are no longer in Victoria. They cannot travel to New Zealand for at least 14 days after they have been in that potential place where they could have been exposed to COVID-19, and we're making some further adjustments to those requirements as well, which the Director General will run through in a moment. We are considering whether further restrictions should be put in place. That includes things like pre-departure testing and whether pre-departure testing should apply, and if so, to whom, and we'll make further decisions on that in the next 24 hours or so.
Ashley Bloomfield had these instructions for people who had recently returned to New Zealand.
Anyone who has travelled to New Zealand who has been in the Greater Melbourne area since the 20th of, which is last Thursday, the 20th of May, is now required to isolate, be tested and remain isolated until they receive the test result. That is in addition to those who have travelled back since the 11th of May or travelled to New Zealand and who have been in a place of interest or in the Whittlesea city area. As previously was required, those people since the 11th of May who have travelled back are required to isolate, be tested and remain isolated till they receive a negative test result.
The Director General of Health there. The Waikato DHB believes confidential patient and staff information stolen in the cyber attack is genuine. Files were leaked to 4 media organisations, including RNZ, on Tuesday. The DHB confirmed its authenticity this afternoon. Andrew McRae reports.
We've examined some of the data that appears to have been sent to a number of media agencies, and it does appear to be genuine.
That's Waikato DHB Chief Executive Kevin Snee. He says the files are now being examined to identify the information on them.
Individuals affected and assess any level of risk associated with that. We'll be making contact with those individuals when this has been completed to meet our obligations of notification and provide support to those individuals as necessary.
He says so far the DHB has received 8 calls to its 0800 number with concerns about privacy.
Generally, the issues they wanted to know about were about whether the data had been accessed, how will they know the data has been accessed, when will they know, and also wanting more information about what they might do to protect themselves. And all were given the details of IDCare, who are supporting us in this work.
Dr. Sneeze says work to restore the IT system is making good progress and is substantial.
There are 680 servers to be worked through and many thousands of devices. So this is a complex process, and in that work we have to ensure that when they're set up they're safe and they are safe to be connected with the wider world, if you like.
He's expecting significant progress over the next few days. Radiation therapy and oncology has been escalated to a national level response, with patients being sent to private clinics in Tauranga and Wellington and urgent cases to the Auckland DHB. Almost all patients have now been contacted. The Chief Executive of Te Aho o Te Kahu, the Cancer Control Agency, Diana Safati, says 73 patients who are in the middle of receiving radiation therapy have been contacted and are either receiving treatment or have plans in place for it.
For patients that are currently on the waiting list to start radiation therapy, someone in the team will get in contact with them to make a plan with them. And there are about 121 patients in that group, and I expect those calls will be being made within the next few days.
She says restoring cancer services is the top priority.
And a huge amount of work is going on round the clock to get that sorted as soon as possible. Cancer centres around the country are pulling together to support Waikato, and at this stage we are aiming for all patients disrupted by this event to be treated in New Zealand.
The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, which represents many doctors at the Waikato DHB, says the computer crash is making already busy jobs much harder, which is adding to workplace stress. ASMS Executive Director Sarah Dalton describes it as a great leap backwards and akin to what it was like in the 80s.
So there's the added stress of making sure that people aren't being missed or forgotten or just falling through a paper-based crack.
She's worried about waiting lists growing even bigger.
Before COVID, there were waiting lists and overload on the system. Because of COVID, waiting lists and overload became greater. And this is for Waikato, making those overloads, waiting lists, length of time to wait for care, longer again. So it's just really becoming critical.
Hospital and Community Services Director Chris Lowry says health and safety teams are working with staff to support them in what are very challenging times.
Regularly going around all of the clinical areas, or all of our areas actually, to just check on staff wellbeing. And we have also made sure that we are coordinating a list of staff, additional staff who are able to help out across the organisation, so that we can either provide additional resource to assist with workload or to cover staff relief. So we are watching that very closely.
Health Minister Andrew Little is visiting Waikato Hospital tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
All DHBs are on notice from the Privacy Commissioner. Lock your virtual front door or possibly face prosecution. Health Minister Andrew Little says he's sought and got reassurances from DHBs that they have checked their IT systems and resilience against possible cyber attacks. But what does that actually mean, and how well prepared are the dozens of government entities with all that private information? Well, Checkpoint emailed a quick survey to 23 of them asking about their cyber security and IT systems. Just some simple questions. When we say simple, we actually mean simple, because cybersecurity is not our mastermind subject. But futurist and chief executive of Gorilla Technology, Paul Spain, knows his stuff.
New Zealand organisations aren't as well prepared as they should be from a cyber perspective, but also they don't want to reveal exactly how they're protecting themselves in a similar manner to a military force doesn't want to reveal maybe where their shortcomings are. We pour billions of dollars into our traditional defence as a country, into policing, but when it comes to the modern era where everything's digital, everything's technology, we invest very little in protecting ourselves from that perspective.
Paul, do you think we're exposed?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question we're exposed.
More from Paul shortly. For our cyber survey, we took a steer from the big guns, the Government Communications Security Bureau. You know how you've got that person in the office, the super user? Well, the GCSB is basically New Zealand's super users. It helps the government with cyber security, protecting critical infrastructure and advanced threat detection. Its most recent cyber threat report lays out, quote, a range of straightforward, practical steps that organisations can take to bolster their cyber resilience. So Checkpoint based its 7 questions around that GCSB advice. 1. Do you have a disaster recovery plan? 2. Prior to May 18, that's when cybercrims took out Waikato DHB, when did you last test the plan? 3. When was your last cybersecurity audit? Off it went to all DHBs except Waikato and to a couple of other critical organisations, including police, corrections and airways corporations. They're the air traffic control people. There were some reluctant starters and those that basically took the trust us, we've got it covered approach. Here's the response from Airways Corporation.
Airways New Zealand has policies and mitigations in place to manage cybersecurity. We will not be making any further comment.
And Lakes District Health Board.
All DHBs face cyber attacks in various forms daily. For security reasons, we will not be commenting on our response to these attacks at this time.
They won't even confirm the basics, a disaster recovery plan and when it was last tested, citing security reasons. And would it compromise their security to disclose those 2 simple facts?
Where it might compromise their security as if they're not really getting this done on the regularity that they should be. That's where it reveals that they're not taking cybersecurity seriously.
So if you had done those things, it would be okay to tell us?
Yes, yeah, why not front up and say, don't touch us, we've just been audited.
Health Alliance manages cyber security for the 4 northern DHBs. Capital and Coast is speaking for 3. There's some familiar phrases across their responses.
We have robust contingency processes and are working closely with the Ministry of Health and CERT New Zealand to ensure, including working closely with the Ministry of Health and due to security reasons, we cannot the Ministry of Health for security reasons we cannot provide matters relating to cyber security or we have robust
Health Minister Andrew Andrew Little's been asking for more details too. He asked the Health Ministry, who had to ask each DHB to confirm their virtual doors are locked and windows secured. Here he is on Morning Report.
The Ministry advised me as of yesterday afternoon that they now have confirmed responses from all 19 other DHBs, that they have examined their systems for resilience against ransomware attacks, against cyber attacks. There's never any cast iron guarantee, but an assurance has been given that they have checked their systems and that they are in the best state.
So still light on detail. In response to Checkpoint's survey, Hawke's Bay DHB confirmed it completed a disaster recovery plan in April this year, and its most recent cyber audit was last year. Southern DHB's got a recovery plan and says it regularly tests that plan as part of its digital risk management. And this on a potential alarm bell ahead of the Waikato takedown.
We noticed that there had been an increase in the number of attacks over the 7 days prior to the Waikato DHB incident. It is a constant battle and there is a need for ongoing vigilance. Southern DHB has implemented additional security measures and activated appropriate cyber traffic management systems since the attack on the Waikato DHB. The organisation already had protection in place and has further strengthened existing cybersecurity systems and tools.
The Acting Chief Digital Officer for the Canterbury and West Coast DHBs puts that constant battle in sharp perspective.
Our perimeter security systems reject over 1.5 million connection attempts for each DHB in a typical week, any of which could be an attempt at a cyber intrusion.
One of the questions on Checkpoint's super simple cyber survey was prompted by the GCSB's advice about maintaining patches. Here's IT guy Paul Spain again.
A patch allows you to basically secure that front door into your organisation's technology systems, and you need to do that on a very, very regular basis. Otherwise, your technological front door is effectively wide open to any criminals that would want to walk in.
A virtual plaster to stop a potentially nasty infection. So in essence, question 5 was, are your workstations and servers up to date with the latest patches? This from Taranaki DHB.
We have a very comprehensive patching plan which is applied monthly. Our last monthly patching was conducted on May the 17th.
And Wanganui.
The vast majority of our workstations and servers, but not all, are up to date with the latest operating systems and or patches.
Isn't that one of the most straightforward basic things you could do to protect yourself?
In theory it is, but for organisations with a lot of older technology, patching becomes really hard and their systems can break and fall over when they try and update them.
Do you suspect there are systems in those organisations that are simply too old and out of date to be properly patched?
Yes, absolutely. Old systems, there are no patches available for many of the older systems that still operate within New Zealand. So there's nothing that can be done other than modernising those systems and putting other sort of smaller protection mechanisms around them.
Taranaki DHB also told Checkpoint it conducted penetration testing in January this year, is currently doing a security audit and has another one scheduled for late July. And this critical piece of information.
We also have complete physical separation of IT systems and biomedical devices, such as linear accelerators.
Those are machines for radiation treatment for cancer. The separation of its IT system and medical devices is hugely significant because Waikato DHB's linear accelerators are out of action due to the malware attack, raising questions about how their system is linked up. And if the so-called health postcode lottery extends to information technology systems too. Back to Paul Spain.
If we look at healthcare, for instance, there are huge financial challenges for hospitals. And if you ask, say, a doctor to make a decision on, buying a new machine that's seen as saving lives or investing in cyber security, they're probably going to go with what they know in terms of where that investment is going to get made. And I think that speaks to the challenge that we have in really understanding the criticality of cybersecurity.
So what needs to happen then?
We need, at a governance level, that our boards really take cybersecurity seriously. We need every single person across the country considering cybersecurity as critical. Just in the same way, we stepped up with COVID-19. We built that team of 5 million, and we had a country that was united to hold out COVID-19. We need to have that same approach to our security from a digital perspective.
And it is 24 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the programme, the $1 million battle to ban any more booze outlets in Auckland. Let's return now to the situation in Melbourne in the snap lockdown aimed at shutting down a community outbreak of a highly contagious strain of COVID-19. The restrictions in the state of Victoria kick in at midnight and last 7 days. The state recorded another 11 cases overnight, taking the total of the cluster to 26. One of those cases is now on a ventilator in hospital. 7 News reporter Paul Dowsley joins us now from Melbourne. Paul, what's forced the lockdown now?
Hey, Lisa. What concerns authorities here is the doubling of numbers each day over the past few days, and that this strain is a variant of the most dangerous strain that's been seen in India. So catching it, and then the time between catching it and passing it on has narrowed. And so when you see the numbers spiralling, they have said we've just got to stop this as quick as we can by just staying at home for a week.
And how strict are the rules for this 7-day period?
Well, it's something that pretty much all Melburnians have been used to. We've got our 4 reasons for getting out of leaving home, and there's a 5th that has been added. It's reasonably strict. You can't leave unless you are shopping, and even then, once a day to the shops, and only one person per household, and you've got to go within 5 kilometres as long as there's a shop that close. You can leave for work or education, to exercise. There's limits on exercise as well if you're caregiving. And the 5th reason, the new one, is you can leave your house if you're going to get the vaccine. And the vaccine guidelines have been loosened here now. As of tomorrow, if you're in your 40s, in Victoria, you will be able to be vaccinated. You'll get the Pfizer jab. Yesterday, for instance, as you can imagine, Lisa, this has caused a massive rush of people who suddenly want to get vaccinated. People who had been holding off and maybe a bit suspicious or cautious have suddenly gone, I better get in the line and get the vaccine. Yesterday, 40,411 people, our best ever, went and got vaccinated.
Has it caused a rush to the supermarket as well, Paul?
Oh, can you believe it? Can you believe it? You're still allowed to go to the supermarket. Yet there I was in a couple of supermarkets here this morning, and still big crowds, toilet paper all but gone off shelves. I guess a lot of people would have hoped that Melburnians have learned you don't need to rush out and buy these things. You can still go to the shop, and how much toilet paper can one person need? But the answer to your question is sadly yes.
There seems to be an enormous number of primary and secondary contacts with these cases. What's the story there?
Well, it's as I mentioned, it's because it's so quick to pass on. It's so contagious. I mean, we're up to now about 150 exposure sites. So can you imagine being our contact tracers and trying to work through all of the people and the next ring of people and the next ring of people? Because just when you think you might be getting on top of the list, there's someone else is infected and they're bringing to you another 5, 10, 20 places that they've been in the previous week.
So this case, the 60-year-old guy that was being considered or named as the index case, do we have any further clues as to how he's got it from someone who was apparently in managed isolation that he has no apparent connection to?
Not that I'm aware of. And, these things sometimes simply remain a mystery, that they just don't know where person 2, let's call them, and person 1, where they crossed paths. And so, it's like they think this is what has happened, but sometimes these things simply remain a mystery.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Paul Dowsley, who's a 7 News reporter in Melbourne there, and that lockdown comes into force at midnight their time. There's been a thawing of the relationship between New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association with a meeting in Wellington today. On the agenda was an alternative to the proposed $387 million Silver Lake deal. The two groups have been at loggerheads over the proposal for the US private equity firm to buy about a 12.5% stake in a company which controls NZR's commercial rights. The Players Association has proposed another option, a 5% public share float. We're joined now by sports editor Stephen Hewson. So, Stephen, a face-to-face between the parties who seem to be in a bit of standoff, but has today really changed anything?
Yes and no, Lisa. I mean, the sense that they actually sat down and met face-to-face is actually quite a move, given the way things have been for the past month. Was there some kind of enormous outcome and resolution to all this? No. I mean, the Players Association say they're pleased they managed to just sit down and take the New Zealand Rugby through their Forsyth Bar proposal a little more around the details. It meant NZR could actually ask a few questions. I mean, this has moved on a wee bit to what things were, just a week or so ago when New Zealand Rugby sent this letter out to the Players Association basically saying, thank you for your Forsyth Bar proposal, but here we say, no, we looked at an IPO previously and we weren't interested. And the letter there did say we will meet with you, but the intent and the words behind it were certainly quite strong in the sense that they didn't seem that interested. Today, the Rugby Players Association head Rob Nichol told me that it was a respectful meeting and that New Zealand Rugby is now going to go away and have a wee bit more of a look at it.
So could New Zealand Rugby simply go ahead and sign off on the Silver Lake deal without the Players?
Well, they could, but it would be pretty much ineffectual because what it would mean is that Silver Lake could then go marketing with the New Zealand Rugby jersey or whatever they want to use, the logo, the silver firm. But what they couldn't use is the Players because the Players retain their own image rights and all that sort of thing, and that's tied up in the collective contract, which is what the two parties are currently negotiating. Rugby Players Association and the Players aren't signing off on the deal. So therefore, it means that Silver Lake, should they buy into this 12.5% company that would be set up, wouldn't be able to use the images and the Players when it came to marketing. And that's sort of the crux of where the Players have got their power around the Silver Lake deal.
So New Zealand Rugby is due to appoint a new chair on Monday. Brent Impey has announced some time ago that he's standing down. What kind of impact's that going to have on the situation?
Well, it'll help rather than hinder the whole situation because, as we know, Brent Impey's been quite outspoken on what he thinks about the Players not accepting the deal. He's very much a champion of the Silver Lake deal, and he's described it as would be the biggest own goal in New Zealand sporting history if the Players didn't sign on. So the rhetoric between him and the Players Association, it's been pretty stiff at times. So Impey, maybe he wasn't at today's meeting, so that was also maybe a sign too that things have eased off a bit, and his not being there and then his subsequent departure as chair may ease the road a little for negotiations further down the path. That said, he'll still be on the board, he just won't be chair.
Thanks, Stephen. That's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson, joining us live from our Wellington studio. E te iwi e haere nei checkpoint, a rich lister is jailed for indecently assaulting 3 men and trying to cover it up. But we still can't name him. More on the highly contagious COVID outbreak in Melbourne that's seen New Zealand freeze the travel bubble with the state for 7 more days. And Wellington City Council puts the pedal to the metal and fast-tracks cycleways. Homai o whakaro, love to hear your feedback on anything you've heard on the program tonight. If you're caught up in that freeze in the travel bubble, do get in touch. How does it affect you? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
Thousands of people who have recently travelled to New Zealand from Melbourne have been told to isolate and get tested for COVID-19. Quarantine-free travel with Victoria will be paused for a further 7 days until next Friday. The state has been plunged into a week-long lockdown to contain the COVID-19 outbreak in Melbourne. Director General of Health has now ordered the roughly 5,000 people who have travelled from Melbourne since May the 20th to isolate and be tested. The travel pause has also seen the Super Rugby Trans-Tasman clash between the Highlanders and the Rebels moved from Queenstown to Sydney. The Highlanders confirmed the decision after COVID Minister Chris Hipkins announced the extension. Queenstown Mayor Jim Bolt says he's gutted by the decision not to hold the game in the resort town. The Waikato DHB says it will offer support to patients whose sensitive data was hacked and then sent to media organisations. Scores of documents containing names, phone numbers and addresses of patients and staff were sent to various outlets, including RNZ, on Monday night. Waikato DHB Chief Executive Kevin Snee says they're now examining the files and will start to shortly contact people. The family of a woman who died of an asbestos-related cancer hopes more people may now be helped after the Court of Appeal judgment found she should have received ACC. Deanna Trevathan died of mesothelioma caused by hugging her father as a child and was declined ACC cover in the years leading up to her death. Her sister-in-law, Angela Culver, says the lengthy legal battle should help others. State Highway 1 in Kaiwaka in Northland remains closed after one person was killed and 3 others injured in a crash between a truck and car this afternoon. One person died at the scene, while 2 were taken to Whangarei Hospital with moderate and serious injuries. Meanwhile, State Highway 39 near Pirongia in Waikato is also closed following a crash just after 3 o'clock. Those are our latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. And you've just tuned in time for the business news with Nona Peltier. Nona, let's talk about the medical equipment company Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. Full year profit.
Right, so people might know them better as a respiratory company. They provide equipment for use in hospitals, masks, and of course, they've had a booming business with the COVID pandemic. It's opened up new markets to them, you name it. And of course, they had a fabulous full year result. It rose 82% to $524 million. And their sales increased by more than half to about $2 billion. So you would think, what a good result for New Zealand's largest company. But the market didn't like it.
Why not?
Well, they didn't provide a guidance. And believe it or not, with the improving conditions in the world, with more people vaccinated, not getting quite as sick, maybe there's not going to be such a demand for their products, and so they didn't provide a guidance. That unsettled the market, and their share price fell 11% in early trading. It recovered somewhat by 5%, recovered rather to end down 5%. Right. And so still a very good result, but the market is that fickle over the COVID question mark that they marked it down despite that.
Interesting. Okay, let's move on to TSB Bank, right? It's allegedly on the naughty step. What's it supposed to have done?
You know, I was listening to you earlier talking about preparedness, right? And testing your systems and so forth. So what happened was the Reserve Bank talked to the TSB Bank back in 2016 about their what systems did they have in place to deal with money laundering? And at that time, they warned the TSB Bank that their systems weren't adequate and expected the bank to do something about it. But apparently, according to the Reserve Bank, they didn't. And so they're going to take them to court. This is the first time the Reserve Bank is taking a bank to court over the money laundering, the anti-money laundering laws. And basically, it's not that they've done something wrong in terms of handling dirty money or what have you. It's not that. It's just that they didn't address the issue by putting the appropriate system in place. And that's the reason they're going to be taking them to court.
That is an interesting one to watch. And what other news do you bring from the markets, Nona?
Well, okay, so we featured in the global market update today for 2 reasons. One, because of our drop in the market. So we ended up down 0.8% or by 104 points to 12,243. And part of that drop was because of the Reserve Bank's stance on interest rates, signaling a potential increase in the second half of next year. Yeah. Now, that's quite brave and braver than what we've seen in other jurisdictions. However, that was enough for our New Zealand dollar to hold on to its gains, and one of the best performing currencies overnight. We finished at 72.9 US cents, 94.1 Australian, which was better than yesterday, and 51.6 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business news. Auckland ratepayers are on the hook for legal bills totalling $1 million and counting as the council fights for a temporary ban on downtown bottle stores. Council and court papers obtained by Checkpoint shed light on the stoush between Auckland Council and the country's big 2 supermarket chains. Foodstuffs and Countdown owners Woolworths are unhappy with proposals in the local alcohol policy, such as reduced hours and a freeze on new off-licences. But a senior police officer says he's seen enough and something has to be done to curb the fight club mentality on Auckland streets. Our reporter Nick Trubridge has the story.
What I'd call a coward's punch, about one a week, that's causing serious injury.
One of Auckland's top cops saying enough's enough. Inspector Gary Davies says every single weekend someone on a night out in central Auckland is blindsided with a swinging fist to the head.
Where people have been knocked out and then ended up hitting their head on concrete, those sorts of things, and causing either significant injury or concussion or even brain damage.
Inspector Davies says drunken violence in central Auckland is booming. Post-lockdown, he says the number of assaults in the CBD is higher than it was before the COVID-19 pandemic.
Defined as a coward's punch is where somebody's just stepped in and unexpectedly just hit somebody. But there's also still an increase in serious assaults where they're just generally fighting and assaulting people.
Inspector Davies says he's also dealing with serious assaults on police officers on a weekly basis. He supports earlier closing times for booze outlets in the CBD, as well as the proposed 24-month CBD off-licence ban.
We just see far too much violence, far too many people either lose their lives or are seriously injured in alcohol-related harm. And very often it's unprovoked, gratuitous violence.
And for nearly a decade, Auckland Council's been trying to do just that. But getting its provisional local alcohol policy across the line has turned into a legal nightmare. Its latest stoush with supermarket giants Foodstuffs and Countdown owners Woolworths is heading for the Court of Appeal in the coming months. And information obtained by Checkpoint shows ratepayers are paying the price. Legal fees have reached $1 million and counting, and that's just the external cost. Auckland Council says it doesn't have data or estimates of the cost in money or labour to develop the local alcohol plan.
The whole local alcohol policy process really has been a total shambles from the beginning.
That's Greg Harford. He's Chief Executive of Retail NZ, which lobbies for the likes of Foodstuffs, Countdown and other Kiwi retailers. Court documents supplied to Checkpoint show the supermarket giants have a problem with specific elements of Auckland's local alcohol policy, like maximum trading hours, that's 9 p.m. for off-licences, and a temporary 24-month freeze on new off-licences. The High Court sided with the big supermarkets, finding largely against the Alcohol and Regulatory Licensing Authority's process and failure to provide reasons for such measures. Greg Harford suggests the local alcohol policy should be chucked out.
We need to have that conversation nationally and consistently, and it should be led by central government.
But what about Inspector Davies' reports of alcohol-fuelled violence in downtown Auckland? This week, Checkpoint also reported the experiences of Central Auckland Māori Warden patrols who say alcohol-fuelled fights and a turf war mentality are becoming more and more prevalent on Auckland streets late at night. Well, Greg Harford says those issues are down to personal behaviour.
Controlling the supply side of alcohol is one part of the equation, but it's also really important to look at the other side of it, and that is the way people behave when they consume alcohol. And fundamentally, you kind of got to ask the question, if it's no longer an offence to be drunk and disorderly in a public place, why not?
Woolworths has refused to comment for the story, while Foodstuffs says it's willing to sit down and nut out a middle ground with Auckland Council, saying it'd be amenable to considering the restriction of alcohol sales after 10 p.m. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
Plans are being laid by a citizens' coalition in Invercargill to topple Sir Tim Shadbolt as mayor come next year's local body elections. The city is already on course for its fourth deputy mayor in as many years, as the man currently holding the job, Nobby Clark, has no intention of standing again. An independent review last year found most of the council's tensions stemmed from a leadership void, with Sir Tim increasingly unable to carry out duties. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has more.
The fallout from the latest scandal, if you can call it that, surrounding the mayor's vehicle continues to poison politics in Invercargill. Sir Tim Shadbolt's driver's licence has been suspended. As a result, someone is driving him around in the mayoral car. Questions about the topic from the media prompted his deputy mayor, Nobby Clark, to tell him to be upfront with the public. This in turn prompted Sir Tim to accuse Mr Clark, the city's third deputy in as many years, of carrying out a betrayal of Brutus-like proportions. Lindsay Dow, who contested the mayoralty in 2013, says all of this adds up to one thing for those looking from the outside in.
I've attended conferences in my professional capacity, and the one thing you mention when you go to conferences, I don't want to talk about Tim Shadbolt, because people want to talk about him and say, you know, what's he up to? Well, I just don't want to go down that track.
In a positive or a negative light?
Negative, yeah. The people that I've spoken to at various conferences think it's a big joke.
Mr Dow says the ongoing issues at the council are turning the city into a laughing stock. He says Sir Tim is no longer up for the job. He says a group of concerned residents has formed a citizens' coalition with the intent of unseating Sir Tim from the mayoralty at next year's elections. When Mr Dow stood against him in 2013, he received fewer than half the votes of Sir Tim. But the ground has shifted since then, with even Nobby Clark unable to say whether he has confidence in Sir Tim's ability to do the job. When I asked him that question yesterday, Mr Clark had this to say.
That's not the issue. The issue is, and I've explored this, how does one remove a mayor that may not be performing? So I'm not saying he's not performing. You can read the Thompson report to see that. And I've told you there's been no improvement since.
The Thompson report was unequivocal. In black and white, it states there's a clear consensus that the mayor is struggling to fulfil significant aspects of his role, and that the result of this is a leadership void in the governance arm. Checkpoint has tried to contact Sir Tim to get his response to the claims against him, but this is the closest we've got.
Greetings, it's Mayor Tim here. Thanks for your call. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
And the vast majority of Invercargill's voters also see the issue in black and white. It's time for Sir Tim to step down.
He's not up to it. He's slightly older than I am, and I know when to retire. And ego is not the way to run a business.
I'd like to see, a new mayor in place. I'd like, but not saying anything against Tim. But this time's up.
Wherever we go on holiday, it's always, how's Tim? Everybody knows Tim's here, but he's past his use-by date, I believe, and he should go step aside.
I think someone needs to get through to him that he is not well, and accept what's happening, which is an absolute shame because, he has been an icon for us. You've done a great job, but it's time to go.
There are those who hold slightly more sympathetic views and told Checkpoint the criticism needs to stop, and Sir Tim needs to be allowed the space to hang up the mayoral chains when he's ready. But most telling, even those people wouldn't vote for him if an election was held tomorrow. In Invercargill, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Muriaki in a Pitapita Kōrero after the news at 6, the ACC battle won from beyond the grave. A prominent businessman has been jailed for indecently assaulting 3 men and attempting to bribe a witness. The men accused the businessman of indecent acts at his home in Auckland on separate occasions between 2001 and 2016. In March, a jury found the rich lister guilty of the assaults, along with trying twice to bribe a witness to drop a complaint. Today, in the High Court at Auckland, the man, who cannot be named, was sentenced to 2 years and 4 months in prison. Jean Bell was there.
The public gallery was packed for the sentencing of the wealthy New Zealander. Among those there were 2 of the 3 men assaulted by the businessman. After an arduous court process, they finally got to express the significant trauma of their experience. Their words have been voiced to protect their privacy. One man had relived the assault dozens of times over the last 20 years.
With the Me Too movement, I was confronted with those memories almost every day. Every report reminded me of those bizarre hugs with his body pressed against mine, the look on his face when he pursued me, the shock of being pounced upon, the smell of his breath as I struggled to peel him off me, the feeling of his hand in my underpants.
Another man says the court process has been harrowing.
I've had to put up with repeatedly being called a liar in the courtroom. I've been accused of being arrogant, angry, vengeful, and weird. All I am in this case is a victim of the businessman, and am holding him to account.
Another man who is in Australia had his words read out in court by Crown Prosecutor Simon Foote. In the victim impact statement, he wrote that he moved there because he no longer felt safe in New Zealand after the assault.
This man was someone I respected and trusted. To this day, I am plagued by social anxiety and trust issues. Throughout the process, I felt more alone than ever.
A well-known entertainer, Mika X, and the businessman's manager have both been sentenced to home detention for their individual parts in the failed attempt to get a victim to drop his complaint. While the group worked together on the scheme, Justice Venning dismissed any suggestion that the businessman wasn't in charge.
You controlled the offending. You could have stopped it at any time. Putting it colloquially, you had others do your dirty work.
The businessman denied the offending, and Justice Venning said he showed a lack of empathy for his victims.
Your inability to accept your offending is made plain in your discussion with the probation officer. You consider yourself to be a victim of the tall poppy syndrome. Your sense of self-entitlement is repeated in the affidavit you provided for sentencing. It displays a lack of empathy for your victims and confirms your lack of insight into your offending.
In a hearing shortly after the sentencing, Justice Venning declined the businessman's application for bail pending an appeal by his legal team. The rich lister will keep his name secret until a further order of the court. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko jingbao tēnei.
From midnight tonight, Victoria will be heading into a 7-day lockdown in attempts to curb a growing COVID outbreak. The state recorded another 11 cases overnight, taking the total of the cluster to 26. World Watch's Paulina Lau has the details.
Locked down again, this time a 7-day circuit breaker starting at midnight local time. Acting Premier James Merlino made the call.
From 11:59 p.m. tonight, Victoria will enter a 7-day circuit breaker lockdown. If we can ease those restrictions earlier, we will, but this is a 7-day circuit breaker lockdown.
11 new cases linked to the cluster were recorded overnight, bringing the total to 26. For Melbourne residents, this will be the 4th lockdown since the pandemic started. Like before, people can only leave their homes to shop for essentials, work, exercise and access healthcare. And there's a new reason this time around.
And that is to get vaccinated. I can't stress this enough. The only pathway through this pandemic is for people to get vaccinated as soon as they are eligible.
Victoria's Chief Health Officer, Professor Brett Sutton, says people need to be prepared to lock down for the whole week.
Thousands of primary and secondary close contacts. They are individuals who've been exposed. Any one of them could become cases over the next 14 days from their exposure. So we really just need to see each and every day what new cases might emerge.
For the next week, masks must be worn indoors and outdoors unless at home. Public gatherings are banned. Cafes, restaurants and pubs can provide takeaways, while schools will move to remote learning. Funerals are limited to 10 people and weddings are not allowed to go ahead. Mr Merlino says the variant is infectious and fast-moving.
And in just 24 hours, the number of cases has doubled. So unless something drastic happens, this will become increasingly uncontrollable. If we make the wrong choice now, if we wait too long, this thing will get away from us.
The decision came after a morning of meetings and days of increasing cases. More than 80 exposure sites have been identified, including sites in regional Victoria, far further than authorities would like. Other states have reacted swiftly. New South Wales is urging people not to travel to Victoria. Western Australia has closed its borders to Victoria. Only exempt travellers are allowed into the state. Northern Territory's Premier Natasha Files has declared Greater Metropolitan Melbourne and Bendigo hotspots.
But as of midnight last night, anyone arriving in the Northern Territory from Greater Metropolitan Melbourne and Bendigo will be going to mandatory quarantine. We have our facilities stood up and ready to go at Howard Springs and also in Alice Springs.
Melbourne endured 111 days of lockdown last year and a 5-day snap lockdown earlier in February. There's no current plan to extend the lockdown beyond the 7 days, but officials say they will be assessing the situation day by day. For Checkpoint, Polina Lau.
At least 8 people have been killed in a mass shooting in San Jose in California. The incident happened at a light rail yard and the shooter is an employee of the Valley Transportation Authority. The gunman was well known to the victims, targeting his colleagues before turning the gun on himself. It's being described as a very large crime scene. CNN's Dan Simon has the details.
We do have multiple victims and we have multiple casualties at this point.
Another mass shooting.
We formed multiple tactical teams that came into the building to extricate victims out. Multiple agencies came in and initiated what we call as a rescue task force. That is part of our active shooter protocol.
This time at a light rail maintenance yard in San Jose, California, where trains are stored and dispatched for the Valley Transportation Authority. As of now, investigators say at least 8 people were killed. The shooter also dead.
I will confirm you that it is a VTA employee.
Details in the investigation still very fluid.
We received information that there are explosive devices that are located inside the building. That being said, we activated our bomb squad, which is currently out on scene.
VTA's board chairman, Glenn Hendricks.
VTA is a family. People in the organization know everyone. This is a terrible tragedy, and we will do everything we can to help people get through this.
Family members showing up to find their loved ones.
I'm just going to get to my wife.
I'm the mayor of the city of San Jose.
San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardi joining law enforcement this afternoon to express his sympathies.
This is a horrific day for our city. And it's a tragic day for the VTA family. And our heart pains for the families and the co-workers.
Multiple agencies, including the FBI, assisting in the ongoing investigation.
The FBI's role in this investigation is to provide assistance to the Santa Clara Sheriff's Office, to provide evidence response resources. It is a fairly sizable crime scene and is going to take a while to process.
And that was CNN's Dan Simon. There has been 232 mass shootings in the US so far this year. A massive campaign by cycling advocates has forced Wellington City Council to do a U-turn, signing off today on fast-tracking cycleways across the city. The $200 million plus project, which is part of the council's 10-year plan, was the result of a last-minute amendment. Ruth Hill has been at today's meeting and filed this report.
If councillors hadn't decided to support the full bells and whistles plan already, a moving public submission immediately before the debate may have made their minds up. Jennifer Lawless's brother Ben died after being knocked off his bike in Korori in 2011.
Ben's funeral cost $12,000. So his death was really cheap compared to what you're putting into the investment today. The numbers there don't stack up. NZTA at the time estimated that the full cost of each road death was $4 million. Ben's death was also very expensive, so the numbers stack up.
The plan that went out for public consultation was option 3, to spend $120 million over a decade on cycleways. In a last-minute amendment signalled to councillors overnight, Mayor Andy Foster proposed fast-tracking some temporary cycleways at an extra cost of $52 million. But Councillor Tamitha Paul trumped that, putting option 4 back on the table, the full $226 million plan rejected back in February on the advice of council officers that there wasn't the workforce to do it. Councillor Malcolm Sparrow, one of 3 councillors who voted against the proposal, accused his colleagues of ignoring the council's own survey last month, which found more than half of Wellingtonians want the council to spend less on cycleways.
Despite no one having referred to that survey this morning, because it may not be convenient to do so, I would suggest it's possibly more representative of the views of Wellingtonians as a whole. And we're here to represent Wellingtonians as a whole, not just certain minorities.
Councillor Iona Pannett said community consultation was important, but it needed to be managed carefully.
Because it is not optional about whether someone is hit by a car or not and what we do to protect that person. But I appreciate also the need to make sure that we are listening to people and talking about some proactive solutions which will meet their concerns if they don't support the network.
Southern Ward Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons supported the amendment, but cautioned against leaving the community behind. Tamitha Paul agreed consultation was important to avoid what she called any allergic reaction. But at the same time, it was important to follow cities around the world who have changed their transport cultures.
They have just ripped the Band-Aid off, and I do think we do need to rip the Band-Aid off, and some of us need to be prepared to sacrifice our jobs to get it done. And I am one of those ones, all right? I'm prepared to give up my job in order to rapidly deploy a network of creative and affordable solutions to uplift safety quickly.
And councillors agreed, with the amendment passing to applause. Mayor Andy Foster, who also cast his vote in favour of option 4 in the end, said his proposed amendment had been an attempt to steer a middle course.
And obviously they heard a lot of submissions in favour of it. We had a very strong campaign in favour of it, and obviously they think that more than counteracts the statistically valid survey, which said in fact, if anything, we should slow down. So, I'm trying to steer that middle line between the two.
The council was reconvening this afternoon to discuss the rest of the long-term plan. The current proposals on the table are set to take the rate rise to nearly 16%, but the council hopes to rein it back to the 13.5% it had earlier promised Wellingtonians. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on the cybersecurity issue in the Waikato DHB. On Twitter, one person is telling us that DHB should have a cybersecurity expert on their boards. Another listener says, I reported a problem to GCSB in March 2018. They said I was small fish. The problem affects probably 120,000 connections in New Zealand, this listener says, using a certain model router. I was not impressed with the treatment I received. A conclusion was reached without any data being looked at. Malcolm's got in touch to say you will never get absolute assurance of watertight security from any honest IT department because there is no such thing. Any system which has a physical or wireless connection to the internet is potentially vulnerable. On the bubble, this person says people travelled at their own risk. It was made abundantly clear at the very beginning. It couldn't have been clearer with a crayon picture being drawn for them.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatao tēnei. Thousands of people who have recently travelled to New Zealand from Melbourne have been told to isolate and get tested for COVID-19. Quarantine-free travel with Victoria will be paused for a further 7 days until next Friday. The state has plunged into a week-long lockdown to contain the COVID-19 outbreak in Melbourne. The Director-General of Health has now ordered the roughly 5,000 people who have travelled from Melbourne since May the 20th to isolate and be tested. The COVID-19 response Minister Chris Hipkins says officials will be contacting those people to ensure this happens.
We will certainly be endeavouring to get in touch with them. We have contact information from them. That's been part of our Trans-Tasman arrangements, making sure we've got contact information. In some cases it's an email address, in some cases it's a mobile number, or in some cases it's both.
The Melbourne cluster has grown to more than 30 cases and thousands of primary and secondary contacts have been identified. And in news just to hand, Victorian passengers travelling on the Ghan tourist train have been offloaded in outback South Australia because of COVID-19 concerns. The Super Rugby Trans-Tasman clash between the Highlanders and the Rebels will be moved from Queenstown to Sydney in response to Melbourne's 7-day lockdown. The Highlanders confirmed the decision after the travel pause between Victoria and New Zealand was extended. The game was set to be played at the Sir John Davies Oval in Queenstown on Sunday afternoon. The Highlanders will travel to Sydney on Saturday ahead of their round 3 match. Highlanders Chief Executive Roger Clark says the club is disappointed for the people of Queenstown, fans and the wider region. But Mr Clark says he is grateful the match could still go ahead. The Waikato DHB will be contacting people whose sensitive data was hacked and then sent to media organisations. Scores of documents containing names, phone numbers and addresses of patients and staff were sent to various outlets, including RNZ, on Monday night. The board confirmed their authenticity this afternoon. The DHB's Chief Executive Kevin Snee says they're now examining the files.
Individuals affected and assess any level of risk associated with that. We'll be making contact with those individuals when this has been completed to meet our obligations of notification and provide support to those individuals as necessary.
Those affected will be contacted in the next day or so. Wellington City Councillors have voted in support of an 11th hour proposal to roll out cycleways across the capital over the next decade. The $226 million project, part of the council's long-term plan, was rejected in February in favour of a cheaper option focusing on high-priority routes. Jennifer Lawless, whose brother Ben died after being knocked off his bike 10 years ago, told councillors that at the end of their 10-year plan, her 12-year-old son would be the same age as her brother when he died.
A whole generation is a long time to wait for real change. Please be bold. Your decision today could protect another family from sitting here in 10 years' time holding a picture of somebody they may never see again.
Jennifer Lawless told councillors their decision should be about lives, not votes or money. A judge says a prominent businessman who indecently assaulted 3 men, then tried to cover it up, had others do his dirty work for him. 3 men accused the rich lister, who can't be named, of indecent acts at his home in Auckland on separate occasions between 2001 and 2016. Today, he was sentenced to 2 years and 4 months in prison for indecent assault and attempting to bribe a witness. Well-known entertainer Mika X and the businessman's manager are serving home detention for their part in a failed attempt to get a victim to withdraw his complaint. Justice Venning dismissed any suggestion that the businessman wasn't in charge of the plan.
You controlled the offending. You could have stopped it at any time. Putting it colloquially, you had others do your dirty work.
Justice Venning says the man showed a lack of empathy for his victims. The Waikato mongrel mob Kingdom has launched a petition to have National Party MP Simeon Brown stripped of his parliamentary portfolios. Mr Brown oversees the police, corrections, serious fraud office and youth portfolios for National. The president of the Waikato chapter, Sani Fatupaito, says he's deeply disturbed by comments made by Mr Brown about the tangihanga of a senior Hawke's Bay mongrel mob member. In a statement, he says Mr Brown has been deliberately inciting division along racial lines. Mr Fatupaito says Simeon Brown should apologise and National should censure him. Mr Brown told RNZ if gangs are trying to get him sacked, he must be doing something right. It's 5 minutes past 6. Black Caps newcomer Devon Conway has the inside running to open the batting in next week's test against England after being named to partner Tom Latham in an intra-squad game in Southampton tonight. South African-born Conway has played limited overs matches for New Zealand but is yet to make his test debut. Latham will captain one side, which also includes Tom Blundell, who he opened the batting with in the test against Pakistan in January, but now appears set to miss out to Conway come the first test at Lords.
We're all very competitive people, and I'm sure no one likes losing, and I think that will be enough to create an intensity over the next couple of days.
Kane Williamson's side has Will Young and Rachin Ravindra as the openers. All Black lock Scott Barrett has returned to the Crusaders lineup to lead the side against the Waratahs in Wollongong on Saturday, having missed the past couple of games through illness. New Zealand cyclist George Bennett sits 12th overall in the Giro d'Italia, having recorded his third top 10 stage finish in the race. He sits 2 minutes and 21 seconds off the lead. Four-time Grand Slam champion Naomi Osaka will refuse to take questions from the media at this year's French Tennis Open, saying the nature of news conferences puts undue burden on players' mental health. She says expecting players to answer questions after losing amounts to kicking a person while they're down. That's the news.
The Fight for the Wild podcast series returns this week to hear from those without whom predator-free cannot succeed. Māori.
Being tangata whenua from here, our belief that we were the trees, the plants, the flora and the fauna, our siblings, brothers and sisters, and so there's an obligation to look after them.
Fight for the Wild is available online and on air on Our Changing World after the 9 o'clock news on Thursday night, right here on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northern and western areas from Northland to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine tonight, a period of rain tomorrow, followed by a few showers and increasing fine spells in the afternoon or evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, showers north of Napier clearing tonight. Mainly fine tomorrow, a few afternoon or evening showers. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine tonight. Rain or showers at times tomorrow. Nelson and Buller, a few showers developing this evening. A period of rain tomorrow, then easing in the afternoon. Westland and Fiordland, drizzle turns to rain in Fiordland this evening. Westland overnight, then easing to showers tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered rain developing in Southland tonight. Elsewhere overnight, snow to 800 metres tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. RNZ National. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. From midnight tonight, Victoria will go into lockdown for 7 days as the state frantically tries to cram a lid on the rapidly growing number of COVID-19 cases. And late this afternoon, the COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, announced the pause in quarantine-free travel between New Zealand and Victoria would be extended for another 7 days. New Zealanders impacted by the news say it's disappointing, but are resigned to the fact it's the best option in the face of another risky outbreak. Emma Hatton reports.
Grandmother Jo Needham was looking forward to seeing her 10-month-old grandson Archie and her daughter, who live in Melbourne, on Saturday. Something no longer possible, though, due to travel restrictions that will be in place by then.
They were planning to come over and bring him over, and all her girlfriends and all her friends are here, and all their babies and all the children, and we're going to just have a lovely week over here. His first trip, you know.
She recently spoke to her daughter, who was a bit tearful, but in Jo's words, pragmatic about the situation.
I feel for them, really, because, you know, it's friends and family they want to show their little man off to. However, I'm sure it'll eventuate.
She's just one of many impacted by the Level 3-like lockdown for the state. Acting Premier James Merlino earlier described their best efforts so far as not good enough to keep pace with the quickly transmitting Indian variant of the virus.
This variant is moving faster still. So unless something drastic happens, this will become increasingly uncontrollable.
New Zealander Elise Lilly returned to Melbourne only last week and yesterday afternoon waited for 2 hours to get a COVID test.
They were supposed to be closing at 5 o'clock, but by the time I got through, it was just after 6, and they said that they were going to be going through till 9 o'clock.
The primary school teacher is concerned about how another snap lockdown will impact her pupils.
You hear the rumours normally before the big announcement, so we've been building up to it the last 24 hours or so, but it is hard because as a teacher I just see how the kids feel about it. In the last snap lockdown they were really devastated.
Meanwhile, Sarah Cowdell says these lockdowns hit migrant casual workers like herself particularly hard.
Every time there's a lockdown for these short periods of time, if you're a casual worker, you just don't get paid. So in both my jobs, I'm like a duty manager at an arts venue and I'm a waitress at a restaurant. And so when all those things shut down, I just don't get paid.
She's surprised the lockdown wasn't called earlier, but epidemiologist Michael Baker says the timing is about right and believes the risk of the virus making its way into New Zealand is low.
The risk rises as the number of cases rises, but it's still a very small risk, simply because the number of people who have left Melbourne and Victoria and flown to New Zealand as a proportion of the population there is very small.
He says authorities here are issuing all the right advice, which includes calling Healthline to get a test if you develop symptoms and have been in Victoria since May the 11th. He's urging anyone who has been in Melbourne to check if they have been to any of the 150 exposure sites. The Director General of Health is urging New Zealanders to continue to use the COVID Tracer app. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
The government's budget spend-up has failed to give them a boost, and Judith Collins has taken a further hit, according to the latest One News Colmar Brunton poll. Tonight's poll is the first since last week's budget, and while Labour is still out front, they've taken a slight hit. Our political reporter, Katie Scotcher, joins us now from our Parliament office. Katie, talk us through the numbers.
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, so the latest Colmar Brunton poll from One News is out. Labour sitting on 46%, down 3 points from 49% in the last poll from March. They've still got quite a comfortable lead on the National Party. Nationals on 29%. Now, there's a slight bump up 2 percentage points. They were sitting on 27% in March. The Greens and ACT relatively the same. Greens are sitting on 8%, down 1 point from 9% in March, and ACT is on 9%, up 1 point from 8% in March. Now, in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, Jacinda Ardern's still well ahead of Judith Collins. She's on 48%. That's up 5 points from 43% in the last poll. And Judith Collins is still in the single digits. She's at 9%, but up 1 point from 8% in March. Now, interestingly, we do have a couple of names we haven't seen before, or at least one name we haven't seen before in the Colmar-Brunton poll. The Green Party's Chloe Swarbrick has appeared for the first time. She's got 2% support in the preferred Prime Minister's stakes. We've also got some names in there. Christopher Luxon, who's widely touted as a future leader of the National Party. He's on 3%. That's up 1 point from the last poll. And ACT leader David Seymour makes an appearance there too.
And I see Simon Bridges is still lurking in the background as well. So what does this all mean for Judith Collins and her leadership?
Yeah, well, obviously there's that slight bump in support for National, but it'll still be a bad night for Judith Collins. Still sitting in the single digits for preferred Prime Minister stakes. But interestingly, the Colmar-Brunton's approval rating, she has this evening got the worst result the National Party has ever received in the approval rating stakes. She's plunged to -19. So those approval ratings are calculated by the amount of people who approve of Judith Collins' performance as national leader, and then they minus the amount of people who disapprove. So that'll be bad news this evening for Judith Collins. We have seen, obviously, in previous polls this year and since the election, her support's kind of always been in those single-digit numbers, and her caucus has always rallied behind her and offered the support, and have said that it's hard to shift the public mood so close to the election or from the election. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the National Caucus does here. Many will expect that they, will probably do the same and rally behind their leader, but obviously that approval rating is bad news for her. There's obviously been a lot of commentary about the national leadership and I guess what the future is for Judith Collins in that role. Many have said that, there's a, leadership changeover or coup brewing, but, there's people are kind of, the people in the National Caucus are, the MPs, there's no one who's really, at this stage, very interested in the job, so it's unlikely that we will see any major shifts in leadership at the moment.
Yeah, those numbers, pretty epic, that plunge to -19, given that she was at +9 in the One News Colmar-Brunton poll in December last year. The other interesting thing, Katie, that you've pointed out is Labour post-budget, right? Sometimes you expect them to get a little bit of a sugar hit, but they have dropped 3 points, as you pointed out, and are now sitting on 46%. What do we think's going on there?
Yeah, well, we've seen kind of since the election, the support for Labour has kind of stagnated in the polls that we've seen. And obviously we had the budget last week that was widely touted as, a deep red Labour budget. And we haven't seen a massive boost in support in this poll. So maybe there might be some disappointment, I guess, within Labour that they haven't seen a huge boost. But, and since March, when we had the last poll, we've seen the public sector pay freeze. We've obviously got the Trans-Tasman bubble and the issues, I guess, that we've seen with pausing quite regularly some of the travel there, and that obviously hasn't had any huge effect, I guess, on Labour's support.
Thank you, Katie. That is Katie Scotcher joining us live from Parliament with those latest poll numbers from the Colmar-Brunton One News poll there. Labour down 3 points, National up 2 points, but Judith Collins taking a tumble in her approval ratings. It is 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There's relief for the family of a woman who died of cancer after a final ruling that she was wrongly denied money from ACC in the years before her death. Deanna Trevathan died of a cancer called mesothelioma and was declined ACC cover in the years leading up to her death. Now, 5 years after her death and after a lengthy court battle, it's been ruled that ACC was wrong and she was right. Jordan Bond reports.
I'm a mixed bag of emotions, to be honest. I'm very happy, obviously, that the Court of Appeal have found in this manner and are forcing ACC to do their job.
That's Angela Calver summing up a legal victory 6 years in the making while grappling with the loss of her sister-in-law, whose mistreatment the case was based on.
Sad, of course, that Dee's not here, but also relieved that this will do its job and help others.
Angela gave her word to her sister-in-law, Deanna Trevathan, known as Dee, that she'd keep fighting for justice. Dee was declined ACC help before her death in 2016 after suffering from the cancer caused by asbestos exposure. She was 45 years old. Her father, an electrician, worked with asbestos, and throughout her childhood, Dee hugged him when he got home from work each night. After she was diagnosed as an adult, ACC declined to help Dee because her illness was not related to her work. She was left with a financial burden as she was dying.
ACC's there to cover you and to help you out when something happens to you that is not your fault. It was an added layer of stress, and it was a huge amount of stress while Dee was sick. You know, ACC just should have done its job.
And now 3 judges in the Court of Appeal have agreed with Dee and Ms Calver in a unanimous decision. Mesothelioma, they said, does amount to a personal injury which ACC should have covered, even though she wasn't exposed at her work. The case was heard in November and the judgment released today. The lawyer for Ms Trevathan's estate, Beatrix Woodhouse, says they're thrilled with the decision and says it does set a precedent for other cases.
Traditionally, mesothelioma has only ever been covered as a condition if it's caused at the workplace, and we felt this led to a fairly arbitrary distinction between accident and disease within the Act. So it does set a binding precedent.
Ms Calver says the family did receive some compensation when the High Court ruled in favour of their argument, and now it's been through the Court of Appeal. The battle is over.
It's now 100% concrete law that second-hand mesothelioma is coverable under ACC. It was never about the money. It was always about getting something that was very wrong righted.
ACC would not be interviewed for this story. A statement from an ACC spokesperson says ACC accepts the court's decision and is considering its impacts on its activities. It says it acknowledges this has been a difficult time for the family and will make no further comment. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, aho.
Prosecutors chasing a criminal case against former US President Donald Trump, his company and executives have told at least one witness to prepare for grand jury testimony. The jury is reported to have convened yesterday, a big sign the 2-year investigation is moving to an advanced stage. CNN's Paula Reid looks at the looming charges Mr Trump could be facing.
The grand jury will be made up of as many as 23 randomly selected citizens. Their work will be done in secret, and reportedly they will be meeting 3 times a week for at least the next 6 months. Prosecutors have already used a grand jury to issue subpoenas for documents and will be able to present charges which would only require a majority of jurors to deliver an indictment. The wide-ranging investigation includes whether the Trump Organization improperly valued assets in financial filings, something former Trump attorney Michael Cohen testified to.
It was my experience that Mr. Trump inflated his total assets when it served his purposes, such as trying to be listed amongst the wealthiest people in Forbes, and deflated his assets to reduce his real estate taxes.
Cohen has met with investigators several times, but legal analysts say fraud requires specific evidence.
What you're going to need is a witness who discussed the fraudulent scheme with Donald Trump and can say, I committed fraud and I did it at the direction of my boss, Donald Trump. And if you don't have that witness in this case, I think it's very difficult to charge Donald Trump.
That witness could be the Trump Organization's longtime CFO.
Placing George this week is my chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg.
He handled the Trump Organization's finances for 40 years and was even left in charge of the company when Trump became president. Weisselberg is under investigation himself for his own taxes, a pressure that could lead him to agreeing to cooperate and help investigators understand the inner workings of Trump's company. His former daughter-in-law has provided documents to investigators, and she thinks Weisselberg will cooperate.
Will Alan Weisselberg flip on Trump?
Yes. Former Former President Trump has previously denied any wrongdoing.
This is just a continuation of the witch hunt.
Saying in a statement Tuesday, "It began the day I came down the escalator in Trump Tower, and it's never stopped."
And that was Paula Reid reporting. Boris Johnson's former right-hand man has branded him unfit to be Prime Minister, saying tens of thousands of people died needlessly because of his handling of COVID. Dominic Cummings has given hours of damning testimony to a select committee where he described the UK government's response as chaotic and incompetent. The BBC's Hugh Pym looks at what scientific and health assessments were available to the Prime Minister during the crisis.
Some will contest it, but today's dramatic evidence shines new light on the government's handling of the biggest peacetime crisis in modern times. Dominic Cummings' account of the first COVID wave in 2020 is highly critical of ministers and officials. British people back from Wuhan in China were quarantined in late January. But until the end of February, he said, there was no attempt to get on a war footing. Some key players even took skiing holidays. All this as Italian hospitals were being overrun with seriously ill COVID patients. Mr. Cummings argues there should have been a lockdown by early March. But big sporting events like the Cheltenham Racing Festival went ahead. He says experts thought closing sports events would mean people went to pubs instead, but this was completely wrong.
Now is the time for everyone to stop non-essential contact with others.
By March the 16th, he says, there'd been a big change in thinking with the start of restrictions, though a full lockdown was delayed another week. But a medical expert on one of the main advisory groups says none of the options were clear-cut.
Really urgent action needed to be taken, but that was very difficult, I think, for the politicians to balance all the different inputs they were getting from the scientists on one hand, and from those who really felt that this was going to be very damaging to the economy on the other.
Mr. Cummings slams the lack of preparation, including shortages of PPE. He alleges even with virus cases surging, there were no urgent plans to secure more supplies. By September, the second wave of the virus was developing. Mr. Cummings says action should have been taken then. The testing system was coming close to being overwhelmed, and he claims the Prime Minister rejected the idea of a short circuit breaker lockdown in England. Some experts agree that was a mistake.
There was a lot of arguments in favour of taking early action in the autumn, in September, when we could see that cases were rising again and we didn't have vaccines. People had been able to travel and we'd re-imported infection back into the country, people moving around. We should have done something earlier.
The number of UK deaths is one of the highest of leading industrialised nations. Mr. Cummings said mistakes had been made and he was sorry for his part in them. Adrian Hamer died with COVID on Boxing Day, aged 55. His widow Lisa says today's developments provide no comfort.
Mistakes have been made. People need to be accountable for their actions and they need to take accountability. They all need to take accountability and learn, because if this ever happens again, God help us.
More chances to learn will come with a public inquiry next year. Others will give their version of events. Some may well differ from those of Mr. Cummings.
Hugh Pym reporting. Volunteers have flocked to the outskirts of Auckland to start cleaning up one of the city's dirtiest waterways. They're worried about the effects of developments and industry on the environment and are working to regenerate the polluted Papakura stream and its surroundings. By the end of the project, it's expected kilometres of waterway will be restored and thousands of trees will be planted. Carmina Blewett reports.
This awa is under threat, and so is the habitat around it, home to native species including kaka and bats. About 100 hands are on deck to start combating further deterioration in the area, damaged by the effects of industry, urban development and dumping.
So we're here at Brookby Wildlife Habitat and we're launching the Papakura Stream Restoration Project. Today we started at 10 a.m. and we have come to plant 1,000 trees in this wetland to protect existing kahikatea stands and also to create a little bit more forest cover and protect the nearby waterway.
That's Siobhan O'Grady from Conservation Volunteers New Zealand, laying out what the 50-strong team are digging into. A big job lies ahead. The stream's been found to contain traces of livestock and human bacteria in its tributaries. The aim? Restore at least 5 kilometres of waterway by 2024 and improve surrounding natural habitat for wildlife.
The upper reaches of the stream now has one of the highest levels of E. coli in Auckland, so it really needs a lot of work. The amount of sediment that's going into the Manukau Harbour is just building up. There's lots of endangered species that live in this area, so something really has to happen as quickly as possible while we still have time to protect those taonga species that live in this area, such as the kaka, the longfin eel. There's even long-tailed bats in the area, which is really amazing.
About 1,000 native shrubs and trees planted this week will promote regenerating forest cover. Another 11,000 are expected to be in the ground by the end of winter. Behind one of the shovels is Jennifer Evans from the food manufacturer Mondelez New Zealand. She says it's a prime opportunity for Mondelez to work with conservation volunteers again, this time to introduce sustainable innovation.
It was actually a conversation between Siobhan and myself, in which we were looking for another conservation project to work on together. But more importantly for us, we wanted a project where we could introduce the future post fence posts. So those are fence posts that are made out of the soft plastics. So we wanted to use this as an opportunity to have another conservation project, but also illustrate that soft plastics, once they're collected, they actually are in fact turned into other things, such as fence posts and gardening boxes and benches and other uses.
Act Environment spokesperson and MP Simon Court was also contributing to the day's elbow grease. He hopes to have other waterways restored to their original states, but says success hinges on having a long-term vision.
So I've been doing some planting, but also learning from the landowner and the conservation supporters here exactly what all these trees do. I'd like to see streams like the Papakura stream restored as far as possible to their original condition, and we can only do that if we take a long-term approach, planning 15, 20, 30 years out.
Hands-on efforts are due to run over the next 3 years. The conservationists say it's a project anybody can get involved in, and it illustrates the importance of waterways and plastic recycling.
Just chuck them in.
In Auckland for Checkpoint, Ko Kaimina Blewett, TNA.
Before we head off, Thomas has got in touch saying, I wonder if there's any different options for a fully vaccinated person. He's talking about the bubble closing off with Victoria. My girlfriend is fully vaccinated and was halfway to Melbourne when the 72-hour hold was announced. She's now stuck in Oz. Don't know if there's any exceptions for people who've been fully vaccinated. It's extended for 7 days at the moment, and special rules for people who have arrived in New Zealand since that outbreak started. So check them out on the Ministry of Health website. We're back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The latest One News Colmar Brunton poll shows the government's support has dropped by 3% to 46%. Although opposition leader Judith Collins has failed to capitalise with her approval rating at its lowest level. Roughly 5,000 people who have travelled from Melbourne to New Zealand in the last week have been ordered to isolate and get tested for COVID-19. The decision to move the Highlanders game with the Rebels to Sydney has gutted the Queenstown mayor. A judge says a prominent businessman who indecently assaulted 3 men showed no empathy for his victims. Those are the latest headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
That's because sun filters through the Earth's atmosphere, and it's predominantly the red wavelengths that make their way through, and that's why it kind of turns the colour of blood.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
Bullying is being addressed in the film industry, like on set and with actors, but where I work, in the screenwriting side of things, we don't really have any protection.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen, and I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. Now, my first guest after the news at 7 is Dr. Krista Steenbergen from the McDiarmid Institute. It's another in our once every second week series, Materials, Fact or Fiction, the intersection of science, fantasy and reality. Tonight, the material in question is Phyllate, which is a plot driver in the Ender's Game series of books, and I think it was also made into a movie, which allows you to have instantaneous communication with anyone, anywhere in the cosmos. No pesky things getting in the way, like the speed of light being the maximum speed of anything. For example, if I was to have a conversation with somebody on Mars, and if I said hello, They wouldn't say hello back, wouldn't come back to me for